Hello everyone, it's Silvana and welcome back to the channel. So today I thought we would talk a little bit about editing, alpha readers, and beta readers. I also want, if I haven't said this before, although I'm pretty sure I have, to make it clear, I am not published. Unless you want to classify a self-published wannabe erotica on the Kindle store that's all of about 11 pages and hasn't sold a single copy except for the one that myself and or good friends have bought. I'm not published. I've had two poems that got published that came about from there being a contest. I entered it, I submitted my poetry, and it won. And I did that twice, and they got published into two separate contests, 2 different years, into sorry about that, into anthologies for all the winners that year, and I don't even have those books. I didn't have the money at the time when that happened to get a copy of it, and I also couldn't go to the award ceremony for winning either. So I'm not published, so I don't speak with any kind of actual experience or knowledge. I just by what I know and what I've researched thus far. So let's start with editing. There's a couple different ways you can go about editing. So we'll make this a conversation. You can tell me what kind of editing you usually do, and I'll tell you what kind of editing I do. So I am what is kind of a clean writer. When I write, I go back after I've written it, read over, make sure that it makes sense, that I have all the tenses correct. Of course, because I'm using Scrivener, I don't have Word, but I'm using a Word type program. If I don't use Scrivener when I write, it'll redline if you misspell something. And I'm not the kind of person that can just leave that red line and continue writing and go back and like spell check it all at once. As soon as I see that red line, when I get to the end of the sentence, I'll have to go back and fix the word to make sure that it's correct. That red line distracts me when I'm writing and or thinking, and so that's why I do that way. Once I get through the entire novel, I will once again do a spell check from the beginning all the way through it. So once I write, like when I wrote this paragraph, unless the words were flying very well and I knew exactly what was coming next, if I had to think about how I wanted to phrase what I wanted to happen next, or what scene should come first, or what escalation something should happen in, I would read over the first paragraph that I wrote, and when I stopped for a day to go to bed, or because writing's over that day for whatever reason, when I start again the next day, I will reread the last paragraph I wrote, so I know, or two, depending, so I know where I'm at and hopefully can remember where I was going with my train of thought. It's also why I try not to stop in the middle of a paragraph. In the evenings when I'm about done writing, I'll get to the end of a paragraph because it's easier to pick up the next day. I'm then planning on, because I don't know if we've talked about this, but all the green, and I'll move it to somewhere, I don't have any writing. All the green means those chapters are currently done. Blank is still yet to go. I'm on task if I stay on my goal for daily writing or above it to finish the entire book by about the 20th through the 25th or so of June. Again, depending on how the words want to come. If you haven't been watching all my stuff from the beginning, or you just found my channel, I started writing the very first sentence of the very first chapter for April's Camp NaNoWriMo, which I didn't even know camp was a thing until mid-June. So I didn't start until like the 16th or the 17th of June. Or June. Holy moly's. Of April. I started around halfway through April, around the 16th or the 17th, when I found out that camp was a thing. Before then, I thought it was just NaNoWriMo in November. So that would put my whole manuscript in 2 months. Now, we've talked about, I believe before, that originally I thought 100,000 words should be about the right length. With where I'm at, how many words chapter right now, and how many chapters I have left, if I keep that number, since there's a total of 15 chapters, I would say I'm about halfway done. And right now, I'm about 28,500 words. So that's going to put us somewhere in the neighborhood of about 60K words. Now, this is what I'm talking, this is where editing comes into this. When I get done, I'm not going to edit it right away, and I'm not going to send it to any readers. I'm going to put the story away, and then for July, for camp in July, I figured we could work. Oops, I should have done this the other way. For camp, I figured we could work on this. This is what I'm planning to work on for July's Camp NaNoWriMo. I want something that's not my own original straight story, just something I can have a lot of fun with. So if you can't see what this is a rewrite from top to the bottom of 50 Shades of Grey. Not what I plan to do is take the bones of the story, rename characters, and completely write it as I think it should be handled by someone that can actually write. So, when camp is done, I will go back at the end of July, beginning of August, and I will start at chapter 1, and I will read through that right now. And I really don't know, like, the file I have it saved under is Anne, so we'll call it that, although that person no longer exists in the story, but does, but by a completely different name. So I will read Anne from the beginning to the end as an actual edit. At that point, I would be looking for correct usages of your, of their, of to, that all my tenses are correct, that my descriptions are in place and not too over the top because I have a tendency to over describe sometimes. To make sure that my characters are not cardboard cutouts, that they're compelling, that they have arcs, you know, that it makes sense. And when I get done, then I will send it to my alpha readers. Um, and then they will read it to make sure, fresh eyes. And they're not only just reading it in a classic editor point of view, words are spelled right and stuff. I want them to be looking to make sure everything makes sense, that I haven't gone too far, I haven't left open ends or questions that should be answered, that the timeline is flowing correctly, that things aren't overlapping or things aren't going for too long or anything like that. Then I'll get the notes back from my alpha readers. I will take those notes, open up the manuscript, and edit the manuscript to answer those questions and to fix those issues. Right now, my plan is to have 3 alpha readers. And then once I'm through with the notes and editing from those 3 alpha readers, I will send the manuscript again to my beta readers, which right now I have 1. I'm hoping I might find a way to talk a second person into reading it as a beta. But right now, a good friend of mine who is an actual published author, he's writing his second book right now, has volunteered his time to read my manuscript as a beta. I felt putting it in the hands of an actual published writer is a solid idea. I'm hopeful, though I doubt it, that through AuthorTube and the community, if I don't know why every community always seems to have trauma. It must be an online thing. I really don't get it. That maybe I might be able to get Kate Kavanaugh to be a beta reader. I'm not real hopeful for that, to be honest. I would love it, and I know she's not published, but she reads a lot of young adult work, and she writes in that area. And I think with the age of my main characters, while I tend to think of this book itself as more horror or paranormal, I think I have to realize that since it's part of a set theme and it's paranormal, that it's I guess that would fall under sci-fi, or not sci-fi, partly under fantasy. And I don't really like using the term fantasy with books like this because I think of fantasy more along the lines of Snow White or Beauty and the Beast or something like that. And the setting of this is much more, well, A, contemporary, but B, realistic, I guess, speaking. I mean, there's magic in it, so yeah, I guess fantasy would kind of fit that. So she has an eye, since fantasy does tend toward a younger audience. Not always. I know a lot of adults that read like Anne Rice. Oh my god. Well, she's probably fantasy technically too, but Anne McCaffrey or Pierce Anthony. But the biggest consumers of fantasy and sci-fi and magic type novels tend to be uh, young adults, teenagers, maybe early, preteens into their early 20s. So I'd like to get someone with that kind of eyes on it. One of my beta reader, or my alpha reader, sorry, is, I'm 45. One's my age, one's 10 years younger than me, and the other one is somewhere around 27. So that's, younger than me anyway, closer to 18. Kate's younger than that, if I can get her to do it. If I can't get Kate to do it, I know I need at least one other beta other than my friend that's writer. I don't know who I'm going to pick at that point to read my stuff. Might be, I don't like, so the three people I have being my alphas are people I know personally. They're friends of mine. But they're good enough friends that I trust, excuse me, sorry, that I trust them to be honest with me about how the book is. Um, and if something needs to change, because, I trust them. My beta, while I guess you classify them a friend because I know them and I talk to them, we're not close friends. We're in that weird stage between acquaintances and we kind of know each other's name through mutual people and friends. So that's why I was hoping to get someone like Becca or Kate or somebody like that to be another beta, so that it's in that these are people, they would have no reason, I don't want to say to lie, but to be kinder to me because they like me than a regular audience would be. So I want to, if I can't get someone like that to go with him, what I plan to do is try and find, I don't know, someone that I know well enough that I know they won't take my work and try to pass it off as theirs, but that I don't know well enough that they feel like they would need to sugarcoat if something is wrong or bad to try and save our friendship or spare hurting my feelings. So my questions for you guys today is, when you edit, how do you edit? Do you edit as you write? Do you just write it all in what most people call the garbage draft or zero draft, where you don't care about writing mistakes or spelling mistakes or anything like that? You just write the words out and then you'll go back later and fix it. Do you edit right away? Do you edit after a while? Do you let it sit and, marinate for a couple weeks, a couple months, a year? What's your policy on that? Do you pay an editor? And with that, if you have an editor, like someone you pay to edit, do you classify that straight as an editor? Or are they also in your mind a beta reader? Are you looking for them to come back with just feedback of, hey, this is the wrong spelling of there, or hey, your timeline here is messed up? What an editor should do, but they're not going to tell you yes or no whether or not they think the book is, I don't want to say readable, good, entertaining, They're just literally reading it to make sure it makes, because to me that's two different people. An editor is someone who is going through the manuscript. This is my opinion. And if you guys disagree or have another opinion, certainly please comment below and tell me what it is. But to me, an editor, whether it's a paid editor, yourself as an editor from a publishing house, or a buddy who's doing it for you, when they go through your work, all they're going to check is the actual grammatic structure and building of that work. They're going to make sure everything's spelled right, all the tenses are right, all the timelines are right, and stuff like that. They're not going to comment, oh, I like what happens to this character in this scene, or, ooh, do you really think, you know, let's take a gnome book, a nice kind of short gnome book. I'm looking at my bookshelf if you guys wonder. Well, let's take Harry Potter, okay? So for me, an editor is going to read through Harry Potter, and they're looking to make sure that Hermione is spelled consistently the same way through the entire book, because it's an odd name. They're making sure that the timeline rolls correctly. They're making sure that you've tied up plot threads and you haven't left any plot holes. Well, maybe not an editor for that. Let me rephrase that. They're looking at the actual structure of your book and not really paying attention to the substance of the book. On the other hand, a beta reader or an alpha reader is reading the story as a story. They may or may not comment on, hey, you spelled blah, blah, blah wrong, or you said in one chapter that Snape gave Harry detention on the day after Thanksgiving, but then in a later chapter, you have Harry playing Quidditch the day after Thanksgiving and not serving the detention. So you might want to fix that plot hole, or you started this thread story about, here I'll use 50 Shades. You started this thread of a story about what's one of the thousands that goes absolutely nowhere? Okay, so like when Kristen crashes his helicopter, you have, as a reader, you have a few pages, not many, but a few pages where he's missing, no one knows what's happened to him, nobody's heard from him, and Anna's having a complete, at least inner meltdown that he's missing, and that's when she kind of comes to the realization that she cares about him more than she thought she did, because she's feeling quite down and lost without him. It's not very many pages until he suddenly is boom back. And in the movie, it's literally maybe like 30 seconds. If you're going to do suspense of that nature, is the character dead or alive? I think that's something you need to hold for a little bit to let it actually sink in to the minds of the reader. So if I had been an alpha reader or a beta reader for E.L. James in that moment, I'd have given that, I'd have redlined that for her or highlighted it for her and sent it back with the notation of, this is too short a beat. We want this, if you're trying for suspense in this moment and or sadness, then you need to hold it maybe have him missing for the whole night and not coming back till the next day. Really hold that suspense, maybe for an entire chapter, if it's a writing of whether or not he survived, and her trying to go back to how life was while still living in his apartment without him there. You know, questioning, she knows she has a place that she could go back to, it be, going back to living with Kate, but she's been basically living with him all that time. So, does she stay in the apartment? Does she go back to her apartment? Does his family, they like her? Do they congregate around her and tell her she can stay there as long as she wants? Do they maybe offer her, well, I'm going to be a little bit morbid here because they weren't married at the time, but if he's dead and they know that they would, his family knows that him and Anna were dating, and they all like Anna. Christian's dad's a bit of a dick in a way for asking for a prenup, but in a way you have to understand, of course you do, because that's a lot of money. And you do have to kind of protect yourself in situations like that. Do they give her anything? Like, if they were married at the time that the helicopter crash, then that would be a no duh. She's his spouse. She would just inherit whatever he has. With no heirs and no spouse, his empire would be, at least in most states, as far as I'm aware legally, given to his family, unless he had a will that stated otherwise. And most people in their mid to late 20s, early 30s don't have a will. Now he, again, she doesn't ever say any of this kind of stuff. And is it important? No, not really, but in a way, yeah. Because it could show something about his character, that he has one or that he doesn't have one, and what it says, depending on which way you want to take that. And that's why my fun writing for July is going to be what I'm going to do. Because I just want something that I can have fun with and just jerk around with and just be. Because my problem with my book is I have to think and get it out of my head about what's happening and who's saying what, and I want this to happen, but how exactly do I want that to happen, or how do I make that happen, or what's going on before that or after that, what's the aftermath of that action, and does that make sense? Even though I know the overarching story of A plus B plus C then gets us the equation, it's, well, how do we get from A to B to C? I'm partly sure, but not 100%. So if any of that makes sense, I know this video has been going on forever, I'm sorry. Comment me down below. Do you think an editor and a beta reader are different, or could they be done by the same person? When it comes to editing, do you do the editing? Do you give that out to someone else to do for you? When it comes to readers, do you do an alpha set and a beta set? Or do you have just one or two readers that you do an edit, you then send the manuscript to them, they act as partial editor, partial beta reader, or alpha reader to see how things are, not only are technically with your story, but how they are entertainment-wise with your story. They send it back to you with notes, you fix those notes, and then you give it back to that same reader to check over again. If you've been published, did the way you did things with beta readers and or editors change when you got published, for more than one novel? If you've published multiple novels, how does that process work? Otherwise, thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the do's, and as always, I hope you have a very nice evening.